Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What's going on, Mets fans? And I'm warning you right now, if you're still holding out hope that losing Pete Alonso was some kind of genius move by David Stearns, this video is going to shatter that illusion completely. We need to have an honest conversation about whether Pete Alonso was actually worth $155 million, and more importantly, whether the Mets made the right decision letting him walk to Baltimore. Hit that like button if you've been arguing with other Mets fans about this exact topic, and stick around because I'm going to break down both sides of this debate and tell you exactly where I stand. Let's start with the case against paying Pete Alonso because I want to be fair here. There are legitimate concerns about giving a power-hitting first baseman a long-term deal into his 30s. Pete is going to be 30 years old when the season starts. The contract he signed with Baltimore takes him through age 36. History tells us that power hitters often decline in their early 30s. Their bat speed slows down. They become more susceptible to injuries. The home runs that came easy in their 20s become harder to produce. So if you're David Stearns and you're looking at this situation analytically, you might decide that 7 years and $155 million is too much risk for a player at that age and position. The other argument against Pete is that first basemen are easier to replace than other positions. You're not getting defensive value. You're paying purely for offensive production. And in theory, offensive production can be found in a lot of places. You can platoon players at first base. You can move a designated hitter over there. You can find veterans on short-term deals who can give you decent production without the long-term commitment. From a pure roster construction standpoint, allocating that much money to one first baseman limits your flexibility. Those are the arguments. Those are the reasons David Stearns probably used to justify not making Pete an offer. And you know what? In a vacuum, if you're the Milwaukee Brewers with a limited budget, maybe those arguments make sense. Maybe you can't afford to take that risk. Maybe you need to allocate your resources more efficiently. But here's the problem. The Mets aren't the Brewers. And those arguments completely fall apart when you actually look at what Pete Alonso brings to this organization. Let's start with the most obvious thing. Pete Alonso hits home runs. A lot of them. He's averaged 37 home runs per season over his 6-year career. That's elite power production. That's a middle-of-the-order bat that changes the complexion of your entire lineup. When you have a guy like Pete in your lineup, pitchers have to approach every at-bat differently. They can't challenge him. They can't make mistakes. And that creates opportunities for everyone else hitting around him. Now, the Mets just lost that production. They lost 30-plus home runs. They lost 100 RBIs. They lost a guy who could single-handedly win games with one swing. And what did they replace him with? Jorge Polanco, who hit 8 home runs last year. 8. You're telling me that going from 37 home runs to 8 home runs is good roster management? You're telling me that's addition by subtraction? That's absolute insanity. But it's not just about the numbers. It's about what Pete meant to this franchise and this fan base. Pete Alonso was drafted by the Mets. He came up through their system. He won Rookie of the Year. He broke franchise records. He was at the home run derby representing the organization. He was the face of the team for 6 years. Fans bought his jersey. Kids looked up to him. He was a homegrown success story in an organization that doesn't have many of them. And that matters. That has value. When you have a player like that, someone who embodies what your franchise is supposed to be about, you don't just let him walk because the analytics say first basemen are replaceable. You keep him because he means something. You keep him because replacing his production is one thing, but replacing what he represents is impossible. Let's also talk about the market context here. The Mets play in New York. This isn't a small market where you have to be careful with every dollar. This is a market where fans expect stars, they expect big names, they expect players who can carry the team. And Pete Alonso was that guy. He was marketable, he was recognizable, he sold tickets, he created excitement. Those things have economic value beyond what shows up in the stat sheet. And here's the part that drives me absolutely crazy. The Mets didn't let Pete walk because they couldn't afford him. They let him walk because David Stearns decided he wasn't worth it based on some analytical framework that completely ignores context. Steve Cohen could have paid Pete twice what Baltimore paid him and not even noticed the money. The financial resources were there. The only thing missing was the willingness to use them. So was Pete worth $155 million? Let me answer that with another question. What's the alternative? The Mets are now going into next season with a massive hole in their lineup. They have no power. They have no protection for Francisco Lindor. They have nobody in the middle of the order who scares opposing pitchers. And they're hoping that Jorge Polanco and whatever other bargain bin signings they make can somehow replace what Pete gave them. Does that sound like a recipe for success? The reality is that in today's market, $155 million for a proven power hitter in his prime is actually reasonable. Look at what other players are getting. Look at what the market rate is for production like Pete's. Baltimore didn't overpay. They paid market value for a player who's going to help them win games. And the Mets, with all their resources, decided they were too smart to pay market value. They thought they could outsmart the system and find cheaper alternatives. But here's what Stearns doesn't understand. Sometimes the smart move is the obvious move. Sometimes you just pay the guy who's been producing for you. Sometimes you recognize that replacing elite production is really hard, and the risk of trying to find cheaper alternatives is greater than the risk of paying market rate for a proven commodity. The Dodgers understand this. The Yankees understand this. Every successful organization in baseball understands this. But David Stearns, with his Milwaukee mentality, thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And now the Mets are going to find out exactly how hard it is to replace 37 home runs and everything else Pete brought to the table. They're going to struggle to score runs. They're going to miss having that big bat in the middle of the order. They're going to watch Pete succeed in Baltimore while Jorge Polanco hits 8 home runs again. And through all of that, David Stearns is going to keep telling everyone that this was the right decision based on the analytics. But you know what? The fans don't care about analytics when the team is losing. They don't care about long-term projections when they're watching Pete Alonso hit home runs in an Orioles uniform. They don't care about roster flexibility when the Mets are struggling to score 4 runs a game. They care about winning. And letting Pete Alonso walk makes the Mets worse at winning. So here's my answer to the question. Yes, Pete Alonso was absolutely worth $155 million to the New York Mets. Maybe not to every team, maybe not to a small market organization with limited resources, but to the Mets, with Steve Cohen's money, with a need for power, with a fan base that loved him, with a lineup that desperately needs his production, he was worth every penny, and the decision to let him walk is going to be one that haunts this organization for years. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Pete was worth the money? Do you think the Mets made the right call letting him go? Or do you think this is going to be a decision they regret? Because I'm telling you right now, when Pete is mashing home runs for Baltimore and the Mets are struggling to score, people are going to look back at this moment and wonder what the hell David Stearns was thinking. Subscribe for more honest Mets content that doesn't sugarcoat the mistakes this front office is making. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one where we continue holding this organization accountable.